Here at the Customer Catalyst Conference, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Tony Ryan, OBE, Director of the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures, a collaboration between the Grantham Foundation for the Protection of the Environment and the University of Sheffield. Professor Ryan is leading one of the most inspiring sustainability projects I've come across, as you will see in his presentation. If ever you want to see where co-creation can lead you and the benefits it offers, this is a must-watch.
احنا بنجيب البذور كبداية ومنزرعها بالترب ومنرد نرجع بنشتلها ومننزلها بالنظام اللي هو السيستم هون عندنا على طريقة أنابيب. واحنا زرعنا طبعا نباتات عدة مثل الفليفلة، زرعنا بندورة، زرعنا باذنجان، فليفلة موجودة، عندنا ريحان، خيار. ثاني طبعا طريقة الزراعة المائية هاي تعلمناها يعني حديثة، لكن أنا عندي خلفية زراعية كوني بسوريا كنت أنا مزارع، وعندي خبرة عن الزراعة والأشتال والنباتات كلها بشكل عام. لكن الطريقة الجديدة اللي دخلت علينا هون احنا وخاصة بالأردن، كون الأردن المياه فيه شحيحة هون، ثبتناها بالطريقة اللي زي ما انتم شايفين.
So I imagine the question going through your mind now is, how did a chemistry professor end up growing things in a refugee camp? And the answer is, I've done all sorts of things in my chemistry career. And one of them is I've worked with a lady called Helen Story, and she's a dress designer. We've done all sorts of art science projects together. And I was going to the Paris climate change talks and passed through St. Pancras Station on the way. In St. Pancras Station, there was a dress for our time, and it's a dress that she'd made from a UNHCR tent. That iconic tent with the blueprinting and the dove, demonstrating how the UN's committed to refugees. And the link between climate change and refugees is lots of conflicts in the world are about food, water, and they result in mass migration. So she was trying to understand mass migration. Getting a tent out of a refugee camp is really, really tough. And it ended up going to Geneva, to UNH quarters. It went to New York for Obama's last speech to the UN. And then the UN said to her, we want you to come to the camp where that tent came from. And she said, well, I'll go to the camp, but you know, I'm a dress designer. I won't be able to do anything for you, which was quite wrong. Can I bring my pet scientist? That's me. So I ended up going to the refugee camp with Helen Story. And Zaatari refugee camp, as you've seen, is 6 square kilometers. It's home to 80,000 people. It's both a haven and a prison. So we went there, and I went with all sorts of ideas of the kinds of things we might do. And the beauty of working with refugees is they really do understand that necessity is the mother of invention. If you don't have anything, you have to make the things around you work. In the camp, those 80,000 people are trying to build a life. So the main street's called the Champs-Élysées because it's covered in shops, in little businesses, and life as normal as they can make it, goes on. The reason for me to go there was essentially to talk about recycling and sustainability, because they're the things I do. We looked in all sorts of areas, and I was really keen on talking to people about how they could grow things. I knew the Syrian refugees that were there were all farmers, but they didn't have any gardens. And the answer was they weren't allowed to plant things in the ground. I tried to talk to them about making the desert more fertile, using their fertilizer. But that really is a no-no from a cultural perspective. And then we had the eureka moment. They took me into a warehouse that was full of old, dirty mattresses. For them, it was a problem. They didn't know what to do with the mattresses. To me, it was heaven. I knew exactly what to do with the mattresses, because I had a PhD student who was just about to start working on polyurethane foam, the stuff that your bed or the comfy chair that you sat on is made out of. Polyurethane foam is perfect for growing plants in. It absorbs water. There are holes for the roots to go through. So I climbed up, all excited. We actually had to remake that photo because the excitement was so high at the time. I brought a piece of that foam home. The Zatari foam, which we then used to grow tomatoes in. I knew it would work because the first time we'd used polyurethane foam was actually to make green roofs. And when I went back to the greenhouse to start growing tomatoes, I found the green roofs, the test beds that we'd just left lying around, were still there 8 years later, sustaining green life. The boxes that had been put in had fallen apart, but the foam really was working, and the roots had penetrated all the way through to the bottom. So we fetched foam back. I brought some back with me. We went to the greenhouse. We grew tomatoes in the greenhouse. We tested them to make sure they were safe to eat. There's some metals that are used as catalysts in the foam formulation, and we made sure that they weren't going into the plants, through the roots, into the leaves, and ultimately into the fruit. We compared them to tomatoes that we got from other places, from supermarkets, from organic fruit and veg shops. And these tomatoes were perfectly safe. So I knew I could go back to the refugee camp and suggest to them that they might do this. And we had a couple of failed attempts. Because we were parachuted in, I took a bunch of people with me on my next visit. We did all sorts of scrap heap challenge type activities, built bikes as buses. So I built trailers for bikes to take kids to school. We did things about insulation. We did some water heating projects just to kind of see what stuck. And it turned out that what stuck was the thumbs up about growing things. I showed some Syrian farmers how to grow plants in polyurethane foam in little polystyrene pots, in repurposed yogurt pots. And the next time we went back, they'd built a greenhouse. They'd found a design. They'd built a racetrack, thin film hydroponics greenhouse. And they more or less had it working. So my pal, Moed El-Masalmani, is a University of Sheffield researcher who had been an agricultural scientist in Syria. He's a refugee that we'd taken into the university. And so we went back together. And the thumbs up guy, Abu Wazam, he was our secret weapon. Once he was convinced that this worked, it was Syrian farmer to Syrian farmer, explaining how to grow things in polyurethane foam. We didn't need to tell them why, because they couldn't grow things in the ground. Everyone wanted to do this. And the best thing for me is there's feedback into our research. We now know how to use this technology in arid and inhospitable environments. We know what fertilizer levels to use. We know which plants will grow and which plants won't. And almost on a daily basis, I get a thumbs up message. So the last time I went back, which was just before lockdown, to make a film with the BBC, they had a surprise waiting. There was a greenhouse full of lettuce. The greenhouse had been harvested. The lettuce taken to the falafel shop where we go for lunch. And Ali, the falafel king, was delighted to get vegetables grown in camp to make what was the best tasting lunch I've ever had. Success in a wrap. And the co-creation process is quite spectacular. We gave a little bit of technical knowledge and got a whole load back. So mint tea is really important in Arabic culture. I always have mint tea with my lunch. And this guy had built a recirculating system. So this guy had built a recirculating system for his mint. He'd taken what we'd shown him, polyurethane foam, mint plant, fertilizer solution. And you need to keep the solution oxygenated so the plant will thrive. So he repurposed a pump from a soap dispenser so that every time he took a leaf from the mint plant to put in his tea, he recirculated the fertilizer solution, the nutrient solution. Absolutely fantastic. Can you imagine how well they'd sell at Waitrose? And the back and forth has been really, really important. One of the things I'm just as passionate about is plastics recycling. So when they had a greenhouse full of chilies, the chilies were pickled to be preserved in second use PET water bottles. The people in the refugee camp care about the things that I care about in the same way that I care about them being able to thrive in this terrible situation. And the UNHCR has really taken on board this greening. So they now have an innovation lab, which is where they take all the visitors. And one of the walls in the innovation lab is covered in hydroponics. 30-foot long, 10-foot high green wall, producing chilies and mint. And you just have to live with the local cultural differences. I don't know why there's a model of the Eiffel Tower in the middle of that wall either. But that's the spirit of what we do together. And it's encapsulated in my pal, Abu Wissam. Turns out we're the same age. We have the same family, a wife and 2 daughters, and his daughters are about the same age as mine. We communicate pretty often, even though we have very, very few words in common. I speak next to no Arabic. He speaks even less English. But we have this co-creation bond where we learn things from each other and share them with everyone else. Now there's COVID-19, Abu Wissam can't do the face-to-face training. He can't spread the word in the same way that he has done to the 1,000 people that have been trained so far. So he worked with Moed back in Sheffield online to develop an online training program. Because sadly, COVID's reached the refugee camp. The lockdown was so effective that they've only had cases for the last couple of weeks. And now they're locked up in those little cabins. And as you'll see in the film that follows, the online training has really worked. And you know your co-creation has worked when your partners really own it.
الشتلة اللي موجودة هون بين ايدينا، في عنا هون الاسفنجة اللي هي الوسط تكون مفتوحة مشان تتيح مجال للشرش او الجذور انها تطلع من الجانب الاخر.
هاي المواد هي بتغنينا عن المواد المغذية العضوية الموجودة بالتربة، وبنكون احنا هون زودنا النبات بشروط كاملة للزراعة المائية.
حضرت الجلسات بالقطاع الثالث وكانت فكرة جيدة.
حاولت تطبقها؟
طبقناها
عشان احنا نكمل سلسلة التدريبات وما نقطعها، لانه احنا كنا زمان نعملها قبل كورونا والفيروس قبل ما ينتشر. هسه حاليا بالاغلاقات اللي صارت احنا حاليا حبينا نكمل هذه الموضوع التدريبات، والتدريبات هاي نكملها معكم عن طريق الاونلاين ونشوف مدى نجاحها.
Co-creation offers new ways to think. What can be created with thousands of mattresses in a refugee camp? My take? If you think of refugees as customers, what did they lack? And who can you work with to fill the need? Could you co-create a desert garden? And who else can benefit from this technology? Enormous thanks to Professor Ryan and his team. And as a reminder, we'll also be hearing more about co-creation from Martin Peters, Head of People, Insight and Co-creation at Signify, talking with their customer, Remco Duchart, at the supermarket chain Albert Heijn. Now, let's continue with the Customer Catalyst Conference.